Black Lagoon is the best anime since Uzumaki. Huh. I love those crazy ninjas. It's a show that everybody fucking loves. And with good reason. From the likeable sexy characters to the fun, never too serious story to the pulse-pounding action on a worldwide scale. Black Lagoon, with its 12-episode first season, 12-episode second season, and 5-episode OVA third season, has become one of the most beloved anime in history. Just take a look at Mal's highest rated anime of all time list, with the first season sitting with an 8.12 and being ranked 413th, the second season sitting with an 8.25 and being ranked 286th, and the third season also sitting with an 8.12 and being ranked 414th. That's right under Cowboy fucking Bebop. Wherever you go, it's hard to hear a word said against the show, aside from people who complain about Rock dying in the final episode. Black Lagoon is just a straightforward action-adventure anime that might not challenge your intellect, but anyone can enjoy. Right? Right? Right?
So along comes Black Lagoon, an anime with tits, guns, and cars.
Silly and action pulpy.
The freaking action!
You know, I thought you fucking idiots would get the point. I thought if anyone could convince you to not be a moron, it would be the literal best guy ever. The literal greatest man of all time. But apparently not. Judging by Black Lagoon's mouse scores and its overall lack of representation in the greatest anime of all time conversation, this show doesn't get the respect it clearly deserves. Black Lagoon is my favourite anime of all time, and it's not even close. All of my other favourites like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Cowboy Bebop, and Serial Experiments Lain don't even come close. And it's quite likely that nothing ever will. Constantly, Black Lagoon is quantified as a brainless action show that's fun for action junkies, but nothing more. This is unrequited bullshit. It's laughable, and people who say this clearly didn't watch the show or weren't paying attention. This show is a psychological character study of two phenomenal characters that are extremely different, yet slightly similar, and how they interact at the edge of the world. It's about struggle, and through introspection, you can learn from the show and reassess how you value your life. This reminds me of the misconceptions that once clouded a similar action property that everyone played off as stupid. This show is built on the back of its two biggest players. Yes, the show has an outstanding cast of unbelievably well-designed characters. Just look at Chinglish's design, for fuck's sake. But if it wasn't obvious from the title, Rock and Revy are the driving force behind Black Lagoon. Everything in the show matters because of their involvement and how it shapes them individually and together as characters. They are so equally important, in fact, that I'd go so far as to say that they're dual protagonists. From the first two episodes, it would seemingly be clear that Rock is our main character. He's clearly the audience surrogate, he's as new to this story as we are. And he even has the generic anime protagonist look. The black hair and penis relate him to the most common demographic for anime consumption, Japanese males. This is also reflected in the narrative of the entire show. The basic premise is a normal, morally virtuous man working in the underworld trying to maintain his identity even when confronted with the worst humanity has to offer. But it becomes evident quite quickly that Revy is just as important as Rock, and she assumingly gets about the same amount of screen time as he does. I didn't exactly count, but in episode 16 of the show, we follow Revy from the beginning and we don't even see Rock for the first time until the final moments of the episode. Now that's just one episode, but there's not an alternative episode where we don't see Revy for that long, ever. Even in Roberta's Blood Trail, where Revy is only given a few select, and dare I say fantastic scenes, she's still shown periodically throughout the episodes. Until the final one where she's mega important again. These two share the spotlight in Black Lagoon. The importance of Revy is reflected in the author of Black Lagoon, whose name's on screen but I won't try to pronounce. He has done interviews stating that in the initial draft of the series we just picked up in Roanopa, presumably with Revy, but the editors said that the test audiences were finding it hard to connect with the story because they're cowards. So Rock was created as an audience surrogate and a generic main character. Now what's done with Rock throughout the series justifies his inclusion undoubtedly. He is a great character, but he's certainly no Revy. Their equal screen time and narrative focus, as well as Rock's absence from the initial pitch, would indicate to me that they are both dual protagonists. The show is actively better because of the cast's performances, especially in characters like Balalaika, Dutch and Etta, but especially in Revy. I'm very technically minded when it comes to art, more specifically in TV shows and movies. I find it far easier to analyze cinematography, dialogue, and performances than characters and thematics. Even though in this video that's exactly what I'm trying to do. The performances here make the show. The show is so quick-witted and no-holds-barred in its approach that the voice work defines the series' identity to me. Revy, as I mentioned earlier, is particularly outstanding.
We'll cut through Chalkwam Market and then it's just straight down Satnam Street. But more importantly, last time I checked, you had no education either, you fucking whore.
I'm sorry. Hey, Rock, where the fuck are all the rides?
All right, you've made your point, now just let him go. My fingers are twitching.
Everything she says flows perfectly, and the dubbed dialogue fits her character and her contemporary expressions. The dialogue feels natural and realistic in the way Quentin Tarantino's dialogue does. It's almost perfect speech. This idea of perfect speech that's reflected in Tarantino-like dialogue is how everyone wishes they sounded when they talked. It's an idealized version of an interaction that lives only in our heads and that one time we got it all right in real life. All the lines of dialogue are well structured and thought out so that the message is fully communicated, but the dialogue still sounds believably ad-libbed and natural. It's important that the dialogue sounds natural to the situation and communicates whatever is needed to be communicated, whether it's a character's reaction or exposition, so that we aren't taken out of the experience with weird phrasing. If you want an outright example of this weird phrasing, ruining the message and taking you out of the experience, just turn on Monday Night Raw. After one line of dialogue, you'll want to blow your brains out. Getting back on track, Black Lagoon is the only anime I've ever seen, maybe with the exception of Baccano, that I would consider to have good dialogue. With Baccano, the dialogue itself isn't that impressive, but the spot-on 1930s New York accents are what sell the show audibly, whereas Black Lagoon has universally great performances which would be impossible without this great script. If all anime sounded like Black Lagoon, you wouldn't get made fun of for watching dumb kids shows. Because even shows like Neon Genesis Evangelion or Attack on Titan that have worldwide adult appeal have dubs that are terrible and acting that's straight out of Elmo's world. Anime has a fundamental problem with dialogue. Nearly every anime relies on lazy narration or monologues to give exposition because they think their audience is made up of morons. These lazy gimmicks insult the audience's intelligence. It's easy for Western anime fans to ignore this because they are usually reading subtitles and can't process how unnatural the conversation must sound when it's vocalized. But when you listen to the dub of that same show, you want to claw your ears out. This disconnect seems to be a major reason why the consensus seems to be subs always over dubs. This makes the characters unrelatable and unlikable because they don't talk like real people. They talk like plot devices who serve only to hold the viewer's hand and verbally tell the viewer what's going on. Usually we aren't watching a story, but being told a story by some idiot who's monologuing. This goes back to the age-old adage, show don't tell. Show us the character being mad subtly, don't just have them yell the line, I'm so mad right now. Because unless you frame the exposition incredibly naturally, you're going to break the immersion of anybody with two brain cells to rub together. However, a kick is only as good as its chasers, and without excellent performances, the dialogue wouldn't work. It's uncharacteristic how great the performances are here. Was there some special voice director that worked exclusively on the show? Where are all these great voice actors now? The only one I recognized was Rock. It is true that in dubs all you ever hear is the same 7 or 8 terrible actors that give a good performance every now and then, but usually overact all their lines and cannot deliver a natural sounding line to save their terrible careers. So how is this show so outstandingly better than everything else in the acting department? Someone please explain this to me. It's important that before we go through the series analysing how Rock and Revy changed throughout, we understand where these characters were before the series begins. This information from Rock is given in the beginning of episode 1, in one of his opening narrations, and then some more context is given when he and Revy return to Japan to do a job with Hotel Moscow in season 2. Rock is an unsatisfied youth who went through the Japanese education system, both schooling and college, and landed a generic corporate job. Rock looks back on this period in his life as a time he was asleep. Rock isn't very complicated to begin with. He's generally unsatisfied with his job and the lack of excitement in his life, and when he is given an alternative that gives him both a challenge and excitement, he jumps at the possibility. This information about Revy is given periodically throughout the series. Continuously, Revy makes neat little hints towards her troubled past. When they encounter the CIA operatives in the end of season 1, they even hint at her backstory there. From the information gathered, Revy was a troubled youth who was neglected and likely beaten by her alcoholic father, and throughout the show there is no reference to her mother. Revy didn't have much of a home life or a normal life like Rock. They are nearly diametrically opposed in that regard. Throughout the show, there are mentions of Revy spending time in different child correctional facilities, as well as different prisons. But there's one specific incident that defines her path in life, and it's the one that's mentioned initially in the submarine scene with Rock in episode 4, but elaborated on and made much more graphic in Roberta's blood trail when she flashes back to it. In the submarine, Revy explains that she believed in God up until the night the cops beat the shit out of her for no reason. But knowing what we know from Roberta's blood trail, she leaves out that she was raped by one of these police officers in a jail cell later that night. This then led to her murdering her father for asking her to get him another beer. Presumably this happened the day after she was let out of prison, and she did it for him not paying any attention to her or caring about her at all. It's important, however, to point out that we are not made aware of the fact that she's been raped until the very end of the series. This is because it's nearly ubiquitous in anime aimed at more adult audiences or seinen anime to have a female character get raped as a lazy excuse for characterization. This is a way of making a female character feel broken. A male character may have a complicated backstory that involves them getting fucked over multiple times, but for the female characters it's just enough to show them getting raped. The fact that this detail about Revy's backstory isn't revealed until the literal last episode of the currently aired series shows that this isn't a cheap device to make her more sympathetic. It is conveyed that she is a completely broken, immoral human being far before her obviously traumatic sexual assault in her teen years. Revy is not a typical character, and what's done here with her is truly interesting. The following is a massive yet interesting tangent. If at any point in this tangent or even before the tangent begins you feel like skipping to the recap and analysis part of the video, click on the prominent timestamp in the description or skip to the time on screen now. Going down this road of thought takes me to a fantastic series of analytical essays on YouTube done by the always pervasive and controversial Innuendo Studios. His series discussing female representation in the action movie genre called Bringing Back What's Stolen asked the question if action can ever truly be feminine. As outlined in the video series, most female action characters fit into tropes designed to appeal to the male demographic and more specifically to the male demographic's masculinity. He identified 6 usual character archetypes that most female action movie characters fit into, and I thought it'd be interesting to test Revy as a character to see how she measures up to these different character outlines. Before we do, I would like to acknowledge that the purpose of outlining these archetypes in the video series was not to compare characters to them, nor are these supposed to be representative of a single character, just a trope. So comparing a character to these outlines is not what Innuendo Studios intended when they originally made this series. But I want to, so we're doing it. The skip button is still ready if you want to get out of here. You are required to go watch this entire video series to understand anything I am about to be talking about in this video. Links are in the description, and remember the timestamp if you want to get out of here. The first archetype he explores is the innocent, who represents all that is good in the world. It's safe to say here that Revy doesn't apply to this one. The second archetype he explores is the Vasquez. In the video he describes the Vasquez as...
The Vasquez is rough. She's tough. She's hard drinking. She's foul-mouthed. She's gun-savvy. She's sexually aggressive. And, most importantly, she's one of the guys.
Now many of these criteria do actually apply to Revy. I'd say every single one of them is applicable except for the last 2. Revy is certainly not sexually aggressive. Whenever her and Eda talk about Rock, she always changes the subject to get away from it. Don't worry, we will have more to say about Revy and Rock's sexual relationship or lack thereof later in the video. This will be addressed. She also definitely isn't one of the boys. She's the only female character working for the Lagoon company, but they are all very different men and don't really have a for the boys mindset. Benny and Rock probably wouldn't even describe themselves as one of the boys, and Dutch, who is the most masculine male in the group, doesn't give a fuck about the boys. Besides her workmates, her best friends are probably Eda, another girl, and Chinglish, another girl. The closest thing Revy has to a male friend in the series is Bao, the bartender at the Yellow Flag, and he's nearly 20 years older than her, so I think it's easy to dismiss the one of the boys label when it comes to Revy. Another indicator of the Vasquez outlined in the video is the change in language, wherein a character tells the villain to triumphantly suck their dick before killing them. Revy calls Rock a limp dick son of a bitch in episode 1, so I think it's fair to say that this criteria doesn't match either. The next archetype discussed is the dominatrix, which doesn't fit Revy because she's not overtly sexual. As mentioned previously, she never talks about her sex life, particularly not pertaining to questions about Rock. The times when she does bring up sex is always about someone else. 2 examples come to mind: when she calls Etta a slut, explaining that her night isn't over until she's getting banged by some stranger, and when she explains that Balalaika would give up sex for war. So this archetype doesn't apply either. The mama bear also doesn't fit. She is of course not a mother in the story for one, and though she is protective of Rock, it's not because of some maternal instinct. She has her own motivation for protecting Rock that we'll delve into way later in the video. Additionally, the video explains that the mother character is easily relatable to the male audience, but we don't relate to Revy because she saves Rock. Our relation to Revy is in the way she speaks and the way she acts. She's swear-happy and nihilistic like most of the male population. That's where the relatability comes from. The final girl archetype doesn't apply to Revy at all. Black Lagoon isn't a horror show after all. The rape revenger is the most interesting archetype in relation to Revy. As mentioned above, the show doesn't reveal that Revy was raped as a teenager by a New York City police officer until the second last episode of the 3rd season, which would seemingly disqualify her from the category because she isn't avenging her assault in the show. We see her kill her father presumably right after she's raped when he drunkenly tells her to get him another beer, and probably for being a neglectful piece of shit. But her rape is at the core of her character, motivation, and philosophy. Her incredibly nihilistic outlook on the world and glamorization of money is derived from her childhood and upbringing, in which this incident is a part of. She demonstrates how this has affected her in the infamous and excellent submarine scene in episode 5. She brings up the police beating the shit out of her and says that's the night she stopped believing in God and accepting that money is the only reliable source of living. It can be assumed that this beating and the rape happened on the same night due to the direct correlation in Roberta's blood trail. So this clearly was part of her foundational worldview. After all, how could it not be? She was raped. Literally the worst thing that could happen to a person. She even alludes to it in the submarine scene. After she explains getting beaten up by the cops for no reason, Rock apologizes and says he wish he hadn't heard that, and says he's sorry. She says fuck you, and that if she wanted some pity, she would have told him something far more graphic. This scene is fantastic at conveying Revy's personality. In episode 5 we are still being introduced to our characters and we understand where Rock's mind is at this point, but it isn't until this scene and the following episode that we begin to understand Revy. Obviously both these characters have deeper motivations that are subtly alluded to throughout the show that we will highlight later, but for now this is what Revy believes. Now let's go into a tangent within a tangent. This scene is one of the best arguments for the far superior English dub over the original Japanese voice work. Both voice actors here are unbelievable. Rock's delivery on the line, "I wish I hadn't heard that, I'm sorry," and Revy's quick response of "fuck you" is palpable. You feel the conversation and the lines flow perfectly into each other.
I wish I hadn't heard that. I'm sorry.
Fuck you.
The dismissive and proper fuck you when it's delivered properly is unrivaled in raw emotion. I get chills when I hear it delivered like this. It's used to shut down the arrogant person who has assumed something and then based all their knowledge on you on their assumption. I'm talking in general here, not just about this show. Another standout example of this phrase used like this that's also ingrained into my subconscious is when Tonga used it. Most of you are asking yourselves who the fuck that is, while the ears of the wrestling fans in the audience just perked up. I'll play you this clip from the 2017 G1 press conference when it's Tonga's time to talk. He's supposed to give a speech about the upcoming tournament and what it means to him, and he gets to a point where he talks about all his detractors and what they have been saying about him online.
I'm seeing on social media that I've got to prove something. Fuck you. I ain't got to prove shit to none of y'all. I've been proving myself since the day I fucking set foot on this goddamn island.
The subtle fuck you is indescribably great. I've literally searched for the words as writing this script to attempt to explain why this works so well. In the Tama clip, it's dismissive of everyone saying that he had something to prove, when he had been proving himself all along. With Revy, it's also dismissive, but it's also a direct insult at Rock and conveys a cold hatred for him at this point in their relationship. You've seen both clips and you understand the emotions that are portrayed by this unprecedented dub performance. The best way to describe it is an outright dismissal of an absolutely arrogant perspective, and it fits for both examples. Shout out to Tonga, the best promo in professional wrestling. Before we move on from comparing Revy as a character to different tropes, there's an anime trope that I see sometimes attached to Revy, the dreaded tsundere label. And I'm not gonna lie, on a thematic level this sort of fits. Revy aesthetically doesn't have the features of a tsundere, she only blushes when she's drunk and doesn't scream baka all the time. She does get mad, but not in the way of a tsundere, where she's just acting angry to shield the way she truly feels, because I truly think Revy wanted to kill Rock after the submarine conversation, not because she secretly liked him and because he made her blush, but because she hated his perspective and thought that he thought of her as a whore after only money and guns. She really wanted to kill him at this point. But the label may fit because she does hide her true emotions from Rock and is afraid to open up. It's time we got to the main point of the video. Revy wants to be saved by Rock. She wants to be saved from the life of crime and violence that's tragically been all she's ever known. She perceives Rock as her knight in shining armor. Fabiola notices this and calls her pathetic for it at the end of the show in another outstandingly acted scene. We see through Revy's reaction to this conversation in the finale, especially when she attacks Rock again for the first time since the early stages of Season 1, that this is undeniably true. She saw him as infallible, an unquestioned man of moral virtue that would save her from this immoral world, and they would escape together. It all goes back to the age-old adage. The more you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you. Rock has been in her world for far too long and is turned into the walking dead, a term she likes to use to describe those living in Roanoke, just like her. What's most interesting about this is it's Revy's fault that he became corrupted by the city. She's the one that took him in for ransom in episode 1 after leaving the other hostages behind. What's even more interesting is that Rock sees this as the moment Revy shook him awake, and that was the first day of the rest of his life, and he thanks Revy for it, because secretly he loves this life and the thrill he gets from living it. They both want what each other have, and that's what makes them the most interesting duality in anime. Rock wanted excitement and hated his normal life, so he took a step into the darkness, while Revy only truly wanted a way out and saw Rock as her lifeline out of the life she had always known. She unknowingly just dragged him down into the abyss, and in the final scene of the series, they both lament that they have fallen too far and they will now wade in the shit of the underworld together. Stronger together is the only hope they still have at the end of the series. So Revy may be a tsundere because she wants a man to save her from her misguidedness and set her straight, but sadly, unlike most tsunderes, Revy does not get what she wants and ends up just dragging the man down with her. Another bullshit point I constantly hear thrown around about Black Lagoon is that it has a cast of the most badass, strong female characters in all of anime. There is not one strong female character in Black Lagoon. They are all broken, terribly fucked up people who have next to nothing to live for. These characters are not meant to be role models for little girls or plastic characters for people to point at and pat themselves on the back for being so progressive. These are just broken people. As a matter of fact, there are also no strong male characters in Black Lagoon either. For a stretch of the series, Rock would have qualified as a strong male character, but we know he sacrifices himself at the end of the show, so he doesn't qualify either. To quantify this statement about there being no strong female characters in Black Lagoon, let's go through our main girls and see if any of them actually qualify as strong female characters. Revy, as we have discussed, above all just wants Rock to save her and constantly feels sorry for herself. That's not exactly a strong female character. Balalaika is a sad girl who's forced to play the role of mob boss when all she wants to do is return to her glory days in Afghanistan, before her country collapsed and was replaced by Russia. Maybe her character could have been perceived as a strong female character, right up until she flexes on the American NSA agents in Roberta's blood trail, and shows just how vulnerable and bitter she is at the world. A strong female character wouldn't allow herself to show that vulnerability and bitterness. Roberta is a literal servant maid that after all the atrocities she's committed in her life could only find comfort and purpose in servitude. She can't live with herself and ends up going insane and is saved by Garcia when he kisses her for some reason in Roberta's blood trail. She's not a strong female character. Chinglish isn't that strong and is bested in combat by both Roberta and Revy, two characters we have already established not to be strong female characters, so she can't be a strong female character by proxy. And finally there's Eda, who's posing as a nun at the ripoff church but is actually an undercover CIA operative, and therefore is actually the most powerful entity in the entire city. We see this in Roberta's blood trail when she manipulates Chang into getting what she wanted. This is the same Chang that we believed up until this point was the person that had the most control in Roanoke. The problem with Eda being called a strong female character is that she's sort of a slut. The people clamoring for strong female characters aren't going to prop up a character that wears suggestive things like that, so even Eda doesn't qualify as a strong female character by these standards. If people were clamoring for good female characters, which they should be doing, then Black Lagoon would win nearly all of the prizes available, but everyone's buzzword of choice is the strong female character, and sorry, the greatest anime of all time doesn't have any of those. In Nathaniel's video, one of his main points is you can watch Gurren Lagann for the boobs and the action, but there's more to it if you analyze the themes, and you can actively learn to be a better person through the philosophy the show presents. There's something about a spiral symbol motif in the show. At least that's what I've gathered from the video, having never actually seen Gurren Lagann before. Nathaniel did a fantastic job explaining the complex subtextual themes of the show, and I look to do the same here with Black Lagoon, while also focusing on Rock and Revy as characters and their relationship. Hence the dual homage with the title, and why this isn't just a best anime ever video. There's only one problem: Black Lagoon conveys its messages completely differently to Gurren Lagann. Gurren Lagann, again, from what I've gathered, handles its themes in a very anime sort of way. They make the subtext very literal by making the villain an embodiment of the theme. Whereas Black Lagoon has a very Western approach with its themes, wherein the show comments on political aspects of the world periodically throughout the show and incorporates them into character motivations, like in the case of Balalaika. More on that later on. Another massive difference between these shows in particular is that Black Lagoon is set in our world, when Gurren Lagann is in a fictitious reimagining of the Earth, I assume. Black Lagoon has an opinion on various world events and political situations that occurred in our real world. From the Soviet war in Afghanistan and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union, to the idiocy of national tradition, to the American horrors in the Vietnam War, to a discussion of power and money. And the show especially thrives in its hardcore, sarcastic critique of US foreign intervention, intelligence agencies, and meddling. Black Lagoon has the interesting position of being a piece of art that understands the bullshit of American foreign politics enough to comment on them without having to sugarcoat them. Usual critiques of late 1990s American politics are done by American authors who are naturally biased by rose-colored glasses because America is their home after all. Not only that, but these pieces of art may be softer on their judgments because they are targeting a US target audience. Since the author of Black Lagoon is Japanese, neither of these sugarcoating possibilities affect him or his work. Black Lagoon critiques America a lot. It's also interestingly fair critique, and a critique from multiple perspectives, both on the American side and on the opposing side. It's clear that research has been done on the pre-Obama world politics that are factored into this show, and the show offers opinions on many real-world events through its various characters and their attitudes. It doesn't really focus on post-Obama politics because everything goes crazy after that and all glorification is gone, for better or for worse. You know, this sort of removed all glamorization from it. An issue that can arise from commenting on these deeply political world events from a certain time period is that for the audience to fully understand all the clever lines in this series, they will have to have full context for all of these different events. Therefore, some audience members will like the little winks they get from characters at certain times regarding certain events, and others will ignore them and prop the show up as a mindless action thriller. See, we just came full circle. Now that we have gotten into some of the wider topics surrounding the show, let's get into the proverbial meat and potatoes of this video series. Let's go through the series episode by episode, arc by arc, and analyze how Rock and Revy's relationship develops, while also commenting on tangential things, periodically. Let's be honest, the audience doesn't really care about tangents, you don't care about narrow, tight analysis. You clicked on the video to hear someone talk about Black Lagoon, so that's what we're here to do. Hopefully through this combined 45,000 word recap and discussion, I will look to prove to you that Rock and Revy are the driving force behind Black Lagoon and why their greatness both together and apart makes this the best anime ever.